Splitgate 2 has finally been announced, and it's caused quite a bit of discussion amongst the community. The game was revealed via a cinematic trailer that was of course posted today, and we will talk about this trailer in detail in a moment. But first of all, I feel like it's best addressing the question in the title of the video, which is whether or not Splitgate is a hero shooter. 1047 themselves have already answered this, and of course, no, it isn't a hero shooter, even though the trailer makes it seem that way. Anyways, today we're going to be talking about the trailer itself, alongside going over some of the other details we now know about the game via the Steam page, the PlayStation blog that was posted recently, and Splitgate 2's very own website. So, without wasting any more of your time, let's jump straight in. Starting things off, the trailer doesn't really give us a ton to go off of in terms of gameplay, with its focus being more so on world building, as this is obviously a cinematic piece. And the trailer itself is pretty cool. It introduces us to some new characters, and gives us a bit more information on the world of Splitgate. And it is worth mentioning that if you do want a bit more lore, and to learn a bit more about these characters that we've been introduced to, they have actually released a Splitgate companion app, where they've even released a comic, and where you can find out some more details about the factions and characters that we've already mentioned. Moving back over to the trailer, it of course opens up showing us one of the new maps that will be playable in the game, as we hear a commentator in the background. We then go over to a press conference where one of the brand new characters is being asked if they are worried about living up to the hype. I do believe more so than anything this is 1047, of course confirming that they're not too worried about living up to the hype and replicating the success of the first game. I think they're much more confident in this product overall, and they of course conveyed that through this press conference with this character, as he obviously then responds to the interviewer by saying he doesn't worry about anything. We then get a bit more of a self-monologue type bit where he is of course flying around the stadium and signs a window, as you see fans cheer this guy on. We then get some scenes of the other two characters, as the trailer then provides a bit more context behind who they are and who they might be, and what they might act like. In the PlayStation blog that was released, 1047 have confirmed that although there is no single-player story mode, we will be seeing more cinematics like this over the game's lifespan. So it seems like they're taking a bit of an Overwatch-type approach with storytelling, where we'll probably get cinematics semi-regularly, I'm assuming with the release of each season, since yes, it does sound like this is of course going to be a free-to-play live service game, but I'll talk a bit more about that later on. We then of course see the characters suit up and arm themselves up with their weapons and armor. And I do just want to say, the art style of this game seems so much more cohesive and so much better than the first. The armor that the characters are wearing looks pretty cool, and I really like how these stadiums look visually too. We already can kind of tell based on the first title that Splitgate is in universe at least some kind of game that people come to watch, like it's regarded as a sport. And it seems like they're really pushing this idea with the sequel, and I like that the level design based on the environments we've seen so far really do reflect that. But following on from that, we see our first glimpses at what made people question whether or not Splitgate 2 is a hero shooter, as we see the three individual characters using different abilities, with the big heavy guy throwing down a deployable shield, the purple guy that we saw at the beginning having a deployable teleporter, and the sniper character having the ability to see through walls. And this was immediately what made me feel a little concerned. I know I'm not the only one to think this, but I'm getting very tired of hero shooters, and although 1047 have already confirmed this isn't one, this part definitely made it feel like it was. And if not a hero shooter, I'm very much under the impression that it's at least going to be a class shooter, akin to what we've seen with things like Battlefield. Now, we'll come back to this in a minute though. The rest of the trailer obviously goes on to show more weapons and gadgets that you'll have at your disposal. We even see the heavy character use a rocket launcher that really does look reminiscent of the Spanker, but with a third barrel. Other than that, I don't really think the trailer provides much of note, other than some quirky dialogue between the characters and some cool action scenes. One thing that did have me a little worried from the trailer is I thought that the game might be switching to 3v3 as opposed to 4v4. Luckily, the website actually disproves this straight away, as it mentions that it is still a 4v4 free-to-play shooter. But on the website, that also gives us another hint that it seems to be falling down a class shooter kind of route, with the segment that mentions evolutions here. And it seems like there is factions that we can choose, you can customize your weapons, master your portal skills, and play with friends as you compete for glory in the galactic arena. But that part about factions is something that has me a little concerned. I don't know if the factions are going to be what define each loadout, and if there's going to be specific weapons that you can only unlock under each faction, or specific abilities that you can only use depending who you've allied yourself with. But obviously, based on the trailer and some of the stuff that we can read here, it does seem like there is going to be different roles that you can play as we've already mentioned, with the first guy fitting into more of a faster-paced assault type role. We have the female character who seems to be more of a sniper, and then the big buff guy who is of course the tanky character. And heading over to the Steam page, this doesn't really reassure me at all, as it actually gives us a bit more details about the factions. You can dash around the arena as an agile Eros, control the Chaos as the tactical and time-manipulating Meridian, or run in guns blazing with Sabrask's raw power. So again, as we've already said, it seems like the factions will sort of determine the different roles. And I'm assuming they'll have different attributes too, like Eros will probably be faster, with Sabrask having more health or something like that. And maybe Meridian will have more jetpack fuel to allow them to get to higher places easier. And I really don't like the sound of this. I think Splitgate 1 is a really fun arena shooter that does remind you of some classics like Halo and Quake, and that's great. But it does feel like it's trying too hard to distinguish itself from some of those comparisons, implementing these class systems which make it kind of a hero shooter but also kind of not. And I feel like it has the potential to lose a lot of things that made the first game as enjoyable as it was. Now, while we are on the Steam page, there is actually some screenshots in-game here, and these do look really promising. Visually, the game looks really nice. We get a glimpse at various different weapons and some of the different maps that you can play on, which again, as I've already said, look great. I do feel like this image of this dual-wield weapon is potentially some kind of ultimate ability, and I wouldn't be surprised if the rocket launcher that we saw the Sabrask guy with probably fits into the same role. Which again, I'd love to be proven wrong. I do not want this game to have hero shooter type elements as someone that really doesn't enjoy hero shooters that much. And although again, 1047 have already said it's not a hero shooter, a lot of details that they themselves have posted about it make it seem like it is. Mostly from the trailer, the stuff that you can read on the website, and the stuff that you can read on the Steam page. It is possible that these abilities that we've seen the characters use might fit into more of a Halo equipment type place in the sandbox, where rather than being things that you have on spawn, they are items that you have to pick up on the map. And if this is the case, then I'm completely fine with that. In fact, I think that's great. But if these are items that are locked to specific classes, then I think that will be a huge downside. There is a few other bits worth talking about, which actually come from a PlayStation blog, where they've interviewed the CEO of 1047, Ian Proulx, and I apologize if I have pronounced that wrong. And this blog details how the success of the original title has inspired them to create their dream sequel. And before we even talk about anything in the blog, I do just want to say that's really cool. I'm glad that the first game did as well as it did, because it is always cool to see indie companies succeed. It's always cool to see the underdog get the chance to shine. The first thing they talk about is Splitgate's release on consoles, and they didn't know what to expect, but they certainly weren't ready for the millions of people who hopped online wanting to try out their first-person shooter. It's then mentioned that they've been working on Splitgate 2 for a very long time and they're excited to tell us more, but they can't quite yet, and they'll have a lot more to share in August. So it looks like we won't have to wait too long for more news on Splitgate 2, but this blog does still contain a few little bits that we can talk about. The first game was made with 20 people, none of whom had ever actually made a game before, but thanks to passionate players, the early success of Splitgate led them to investments that have enabled them to grow their team out. And it's mentioned that there is seasoned industry veterans from Riot, Ubisoft, and many other big developers that have helped work on this sequel. And it is mentioned here that this is now a AAA shooter. Ian mentions how it was incredibly hard for them to stop development on the original game in 2022, but after a lot of reflection with the team, he realised that it was the right path for the best possible version of the game required for a true sequel. They wanted to start fresh, and the best way to do that was to build from the ground up in Unreal Engine 5, with new character models, new maps, new weapons, and even new portal walls and portals. The next part goes on to discuss something I mentioned earlier, how of course it's a multiplayer only game and they don't have a single player campaign, which again for me personally is really disappointing. I think if you want me to care about these characters, it would be nice to have a single player mode where I can actually experience their stories firsthand. But regardless, it stated they hired an amazing narrative writer to build the universe of Splitgate, and of course as we mentioned earlier as well, there is now a comic on the Splitgate app, so if you want to learn more now, you can go and check that out. But we can also expect more cinematics and other surprises in the future that even go beyond the game. The next part talks about cosmetics, and one of the main reasons they made Splitgate 2 in Unreal Engine 5 is so they could have some seriously sick character and weapon skins, which also goes for the free base skins and weapons too. I do find that to be an interesting thing to talk about in like the first blog post, the cosmetics. I know I say this as someone that spends most of his time talking about Halo's cosmetics, but hey, I mean, it's a free-to-play live service game, what do we realistically expect? But they said they of course want to make sure that everything looks really good visually and audio-wise too. They want everything to sound good, and they want to deliver excellence to all players. When developing the game, they also had another couple of goals, which was how do we keep this fun all year round, and that goal was closely followed by a key objective: build a game that can last a decade or more. Now, I've heard this before about another game that, to be fair, is quite close to my heart, but that didn't really plan out as expected. And I do wish 1047 the best for their 10-year plan, and hopefully it pans out. But they then go on to say, of course, they've been thinking for a long time how to keep Splitgate 2 fresh and alive long after launch, and it's not just about making sure that they have lots of content ready when we launch the game. It starts from the very foundations of design. Though the first Splitgate was inspired by classic arena shooters, we realized that we need to make a modern game that lasts. We had to develop the tools for a deep and satisfying gameplay loop. So, I mean, there it is. It already seems like Splitgate 2 is going to be much more of a modern shooter, and I do feel like that's going to be quite decisive for a lot of players. I think it's going to be something that we've seen a lot with modern Halo titles. You're either going to love it or you're going to hate it. There is going to be a lot of people that probably complain and say they wish it would just go back to being Splitgate 1 and how that game plays. And to be fair, I can definitely understand that here because there seems like a drastic shift for the second game. But as long as the core gameplay principles are still the same, then I think it will still be really enjoyable. I am very concerned about this whole faction system and the potential class or hero-esque elements to the game. That does not really sound like something that I personally will enjoy. So all I can really hope for right now is a fun gameplay loop that can keep me invested and keep everyone else that plays the game invested too. Splitgate 2 is obviously coming out in 2025, so we still have quite a bit of time to wait, but as I've already said, we do have some more news to look forward to in August. Hopefully that might come with a gameplay trailer, because I really want to know how the game is actually going to play. But I do wish 1047 the best. Like I've already said, it's cool to see the indie company sort of rise up and get the time to shine. And I really do hope it pans out for them. Anyway, I am curious to hear what everyone else has to say. You look forward to Splitgate 2. How does this trailer have you feeling? How does the other stuff that we've already heard about have you feeling about the game? Let me know down in the comments. Thank you all for watching, and I'll catch you all in the next one.